Hello, my name is Lisa Doe. I'm an attorney here in the family law group at Beresford Booth. I've been practicing family law for 14 years now. For our webinar this week, I will be covering the basics of getting a divorce, but through the lens of our clients and common questions we hear from them. I'm joined here today by my paralegal, Jasmine Brown. Jasmine, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Hi, and welcome. I've been at Beresford Booth for a little over 7 years now. I'm the initial point of contact for potential new clients that call seeking assistance with dissolution or legal separation. I also have worked with all practice groups before here as a legal assistant, but now I am exclusively with the family law department.
And Jasmine's wonderful, and our clients love her. I had Jasmine compile a list of frequently asked questions that I, and the family law group here regarding getting a divorce and the process to do so. So let's get started.
Okay, great. So the first question that we hear very often, I am thinking about filing for divorce or legal separation. What is the first step?
The first thing I tell people is be certain that you actually want to get divorced, right? Whether that be exploring reconciliation through a marital counseling or doing adequate self-reflection or even seeking advice from family or friends, okay? Divorce is a life-changing event. The second thing is, are there any safety concerns or abuse involved where you have no choice but to move forward? And then, of course, it's important that you schedule an initial consult with an attorney, even if you don't intend to retain an attorney. It's good to get at least some legal advice in terms of your rights, the divorce process, and what options you have. So Jasmine is the point of contact for setting up initial consult. Jasmine, can you tell us how clients can go about, or prospective clients can go about setting up initial consult?
Yes. So you're always welcome to contact our office via phone or email. And then from that point, our receptionist will put you in contact with me if it's a family law matter. And I will gather basic information, and then I'll get you scheduled with Lisa or another family law attorney in our department.
And then even before or after the initial consult, try to obtain as much information as possible in terms of incomes, any assets or debts. You could get tax returns, tax transcripts, statements for all financial accounts, retirement accounts, and that would be ideal in terms of just having a baseline of information moving forward with the divorce. And there are situations where that is not possible, and that's fine. We can still make it work. And there's also times where you'll need to do so discreetly so that your spouse doesn't know you are doing this or thinking about divorce. And I know Jasmine works with many of our clients in terms of how to do this. Can you talk about that, Jasmine?
Yes. So if you need to do that and do it discreetly, we do recommend that sometimes you can take photos of documentation if you can't physically remove it from the home. You can go in person to your financial institution or your CPA's office to obtain copies of documentation to deliver to us, and maybe entirely creating a new email address so you can safely and securely transmit information from you to us.
And the last thing in terms of considering getting a divorce, think about a residential schedule for your children. So if spouses divorce, you have to think about when the children will see each parent, assuming there's like no abuse issues involved, right? I know that clients come to me and they've never even thought about it. They don't know what it'll look like in terms of when the children will see each parent. So that will put you ahead of the game if you're thinking about that initially.
I agree. So the next question that we have here is, what is the difference between divorce and legal separation?
So I actually see a question in the chat, and I want to take this question. Do you see it, Jasmine?
I do. I can read that question aloud. Parties are legal residents in separate states. Are two attorneys needed?
So it depends, right? Did they reside together in one of those states? Did they have children in one of those states? So there are times when there will just be, well, I guess an attorney can only represent one party, right? And I'm assuming the question is, are you going to need attorneys in both states? And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's not necessarily true, right? So depending on where the parties, if the parties resided together in one state, if the parties had children in one state, you could potentially file it in one state, right? It wouldn't be an action in two different states. So hopefully that answers your question. I'm so happy to get one live like this. So, okay. Did we get to question 2, Jasmine?
We were, there was also a comment. Ron said, thank you, and no children are involved.
But yeah, you can talk to me and I can tell you after whether, you know, how it would happen. Usually divorce case is just filed in one state.
Okay, so yes, question 2 is, what is the difference between divorce and legal separation?
Okay, so in terms of a divorce and a legal separation, the same issues need to be resolved. And both types of cases generally follow the same process in terms of the steps and the deadlines. At this point, many, in terms of my cases and the cases our group sees, many, if not most people file for divorce. The 2 reasons I see for a legal separation from the standpoint of clients is religious reasons, number 1. Number 2, there's a rare health insurance plan out there that will cover a legally separated spouse. I've seen one in my career. And the thing is, for legal separation, at the end of the case, either party, you have the option of converting it to a divorce 6 months after, and the court will do that. So there's not many reasons why people would want to get a legal separation other than the 2 I raised. And in terms of our presentation today, we're just going to refer to it as a divorce, but it also encompasses legal separations.
Okay, thank you. Do I need a reason to be able to get divorced?
So you don't need a specific reason. You can just state that the marriage is irretrievably broken and the court will grant a divorce. Washington state is a no-fault state, so it doesn't matter why you want a divorce. If someone had an affair, if there's any bad behavior involved, if one party wants a divorce, the court will grant one.
Okay. How long does the divorce process take?
So it can be anywhere from 90 days to a year in terms of filing the case until final orders to resolve the case are entered. In Washington state, by statute, there's a 90-day wait period. So even if everything's agreed, papers are signed, you can't be legally divorced until the 91st day. Sometimes cases can go longer than a year, but that's not the norm. It really depends on the complexity of the case and whether the case goes to trial or not.
That makes a lot of sense. What happens or needs to be done in a divorce?
Jasmine, will you put up the flow chart?
Yes.
So Jasmine created this really nice illustration for you to see kind of the process for a divorce case. So you file a summons and petition in Superior Court in the county you reside in, or the county the other party resides in. There's that 90-day statutory wait period that I mentioned. During the case or after filing until completion, you can file a temporary motion if you need certain relief pending the case. You can do discovery if you need more information. And then if resolution is not reached, you are required to go to a alternative dispute resolution or mediation to work with someone to try to reach an agreement with your spouse. And then if an agreement is not reached, then the last thing would be you would go to trial and the court would make a decision.
Okay. What type of issues could arise in a divorce case?
Do you want to share that list? So the issues in a divorce case are property and debt division, parenting plan, if there's children, spousal support, if there's a need for spousal support, child support, again, if there's children, attorney's fees, if either party needs assistance with attorney's fees and there's an ability to pay. And then if there's any safety concerns, a protection order and or restraining order.
Okay. So I have another question here. Is it advantageous for me to file first?
So filing first is rarely a significant advantage. It may allow you to slightly control the flow of the divorce, just to have things move forward and get deadlines set. And it also may allow you to choose which court to file in, which is relevant to the question that was asked, right? You may want to file first because you want to file it in your state or your county versus the other spouse's state, county. And again, sometimes that option is only presented in certain cases.
Okay. So my spouse and I are currently amicable and in agreement with filing for divorce. Does your firm represent both parties? And that's kind of,
So it's unethical for me to represent both parties. I could only represent one spouse. But what can happen is if everything is agreed upon, the other party could join in the petition, either pro se or with a different attorney. Pro se meaning they represent themselves. And it can be an uncontested divorce in terms of all issues are agreed upon and both parties sign the final orders. I would not be able to, or any other attorney, right? If you represent one party, you can't give legal advice to the other party.
Moving on, is my spouse entitled to property that I acquired prior to marriage?
So it depends, right? In Washington state, all property and debts are before the court to divide. It doesn't matter if it's community or separate property. And separate property is property that you acquired before marriage, but many times a party is awarded their separate property. And that includes inheritances or gifts that they received during the marriage. But it's very fact specific. And so that's something you can consult with an attorney about.
Okay. I am not on the title or deed. Am I entitled to half of the house?
So I get this question a lot, right? Title is not definitive in Washington state, right? And that includes title or names on accounts for real property, retirement accounts, bank accounts, stock. Right? The court is required to determine whether the community or the other spouse has an interest in that asset, and title is just one factor. So potentially you could have an interest and be awarded an interest in an asset, even though your name is not on it.
I know you touched on this briefly as well. Will the court divide property 50-50?
And so it depends, right? Under the law in Washington, the court needs to divide property in terms of what's fair and equitable. And that may not be 50-50, it may be 50-50, right? The court is required to consider certain factors to make this determination, including looking at the length of the marriage, the value of the property to be divided, and the incomes of the parties.
Thank you. Next question, do we need to sell the family home?
And again, it depends, right? It's fact specific, but it's not a foregone conclusion that you're divorcing, you have to sell it, right? A party could be awarded the home and the other party will receive some kind of a payout or other property to make up for it.
Okay. How is child custody determined?
So always lots of factors in family law and divorce, but so the court will consider certain factors when making that determination, but ultimately it's what's in the best interest of the children. And the court looks at, it's not child custody in Washington state, it's a residential schedule or a parenting plan to provide when the children will see each parent. And the court also looks at any safety concerns, any abuse that is involved, any reason why a parent's time with the children should be limited or restricted in any way.
Okay. I am a stay-at-home spouse or parent and have not worked for many years. My spouse says they will not pay me a dime in support. What are my options?
So this is not something a spouse can dictate, I refuse to pay any support, right? And so if you're seeking that and you have a basis to seek support, you can request that the court order spousal and or child support. And if your spouse refuses to pay, even with a court order, the state can get involved. And there's other mechanisms, but to help collect or to garnish their wages to ensure that you receive support.
We have another question in the chat that I would like to address, Lisa.
Sure.
Following up, if one party will reside in the house and there is equity, what are some ways to address that for the other party?
And so the party being awarded the house, they could refinance and receive cash back in the refinance to pay the other party. If there's enough here in the marital estate in terms of retirement accounts or savings or stock that will equalize, right? That person receiving the home and the other party receiving their interest in it. So you can do it that way. You can structure it, right, to make sure they receive their interest somehow. Maybe it's payments over time, although most people are not going to like that, right? If they're walking away from their interest in the home.
Thank you. Okay. Next question is, how much can I expect to pay or be paid for spousal and child support?
So for spousal support, more factors that the court has to consider, but the most important ones are, is there a need? Is the spouse that's asking for support have a need? And does the other spouse have an ability to pay after paying for their own living expenses, right? Reasonable living expenses. And then for child support, it depends on the residential schedule, right? Who is the primary residential parent? Is there shared equal time? And then there's a formula under the statute or laws that provides that calculates child support based on the party's incomes and the number of kids there are.
Thank you. This is a good question as well. Am I required to live with my spouse pending the divorce case?
You're not mandated to live with your spouse. You can move out, or you can request that the court order the other spouse move out. But you also, in terms of making this decision, you have to consider, are there kids involved? What are the finances? And of course, if there's abuse issues, you're not going to want to reside with them.
Thank you. Will I need to appear in person in court?
Most of the time, no, unless you go to trial.
Okay, and is trial necessary?
So it is necessary if there's no agreement, but I can say that most cases settle. I would say 90% of cases settle. I'm averaging about one trial a year. And so most cases are not going to go to trial.
That's very good to know. And do I need to have an attorney?
So some parties do choose to represent themselves for various reasons. It really depends in terms of whether I recommend you have counsel. It depends on how complicated the case and the issues are. It also depends on the dynamic between the parties, right? If there's control issues, if there's things where there's like a power imbalance, at that point, it may be necessary to get an attorney involved. And I would always say that some level of attorney involvement, whether it's consultation before, during the case, is always beneficial.
Okay. How much does a divorce case cost?
So almost everybody asks this, right? And it really depends on the complexity of the case. I'm on repeat now. It depends, right? And it also depends on whether kids are involved, whether there's a need to litigate about spousal or child support. And it also depends on whether the case goes to trial. I can say that cases that are agreed, it could be $5,000 or less, right? And particularly if no kids are involved, right? But then if you are litigating, if you're going to the trial, it could be tens of thousands.
And we have another question in the chat. If parties earn the same and if amounts invested in property by parties is disparate, is that taken into account, say, with dividing property credit for paying majority or all? Does that make, do I need to repeat?
Right, so if the parties earn the same and if the amounts vested in property by parties, is that taken, say, with dividing property credit for paying majority or all? So I'm not sure if I understand the question, because if you both are taking income or savings accumulated during the marriage and investing in property. Because Washington State is a community property state, right? And so whatever income you've earned during the marriage, that's community income or savings that goes into purchasing property. So even though maybe, but then you say parties earn the same. So I don't know if I fully understand the question. I guess if property, into the next. Yeah, if it was purchased, so if the property was purchased during the marriage, it's community property, and so it would be divided. And so I guess it wouldn't depend on whose income, if that income was during the marriage. Now, if it was before the marriage, like separate savings before the marriage, and each put in different amounts in the account, then you have a separate and community interest in the home, and that could dictate how that property is divided or how that's calculated in terms of overall property division. Hopefully I answered your question. If I didn't, definitely feel free to contact me or email me and I can further follow up with that.
Thank you. So one of our last questions here is, how do I pay for legal fees?
So people use savings. Sometimes they have to get a personal loan from family members or friends, and some people do have to charge on credit cards. Attorney's fees are an issue in a divorce case, so you could potentially request that your spouse assist you with attorney's fees, or you could ask for a pre-distribution from assets, if there's like liquid funds or savings somewhere that you could tap into to pay for attorney's fees. And that would be up to the court to decide. I know that in terms of my cases, whatever attorney's fees that are either advanced or have accumulated, I always make sure to take that into consideration when dividing property and coming to resolution for a case.
That sounds good to me.
I think we're out of time. So, but there's my email. So if you want to email me, feel free to do so, especially I think it was Ron that had that question. I'm not sure if I fully understand it. Feel free to email me and I can answer that or further elaborate. Thank you all for joining us today. We actually had many more common questions that we hear that we wanted to cover, but just are limited in time. And again, feel free to contact me if you have any questions, want more information on what was presented today.
Thank you guys for your time. Have a good day.